Hey everyone, and welcome to Liquid Liner Notes, a podcast that will bring interviews from the beverage and music industries. I'm your host, Danny, aka Hip Hops on Instagram. Today's guest is the first of my recorded interviews. It's someone I pretty much exclusively know through Instagram. She is an entrepreneur who founded the LLC Beer Adjacent, a writer for Porch Drinking and Edible Chicago, a brand manager for Sauced Market, a certified yoga instructor, and maybe most importantly, the purveyor of Rachel's Grill. Rachel Morrison.
Yes, that is important. Thank you.
And I just wanted to have you on and sort of talk about, I know you have some plans coming up with Beer Adjacent, but Just first, I guess, how did you get into craft beer?
Yeah, so it really started, I used to work at Allstate Insurance, which was a very great company to work for. Wasn't necessarily a great fit job-wise for me, but I met some really great coworkers because I was in a program that was like a cohort of people, and one of them was a home brewer and used to do it in college, and I always thought that was so fascinating and asked him to home brew, and finally we had talked about it so many times, and he's like, you know what, I'm coming out to the city. He lived in the suburbs, and he's like, we're gonna do a home brew, and we made the first beer. I immediately started a beer blog because obviously I was qualified on the topic. And from there really got in just beyond interested in not just like the process of making beer, but then the industry itself and really the appreciation for craft beer. And so at the time I had started a Instagram called Taco Diet. And I had like grown that to about like 1,000 followers. And then I was very burnt out from eating like far too many tacos. And so I just switched the handle and figured like people that like tacos probably also like beer. And that was right. And so I kept growing it kind of in that way with a very similar audience, and then that kind of grew as I became kind of more introduced to the industry.
Was that more just like taking photos of beer and talking about the tasting notes of it, or what? How's that?
Yes, yeah, I would say it was mostly just pictures of beer, talking about them, and then I was like blogging alongside that, just on my own kind of account, which was Beer Goggles Blog was where it all started in that name.
And is that prior to doing any of the beer schooling that you've done?
That was, yes. So that was the beginning. And so it would have been not too long after that. I think a friend of mine had like introduced me to this program at College of DuPage out in the suburbs for the business of craft beer. So I participated in that program, which was amazing. And I'm like super grateful I was part of it, but it was such a grind because I was working full time at the time, and the program was out in Glen Ellen at the College of DuPage, and so it was like a couple nights a week. I would work all day, commute out to the suburbs. It was like a train to a bus to like all these different stops, and then I would like crash with my parents because they live in the suburbs, and then like go back to work the next day. So it was kind of wild during the time of beer school, but it was awesome because it was the first course I took was evaluating beer. So basically like that program was intended to make you like a beer judge, which I effectively learned I probably wouldn't be that great at just because I don't pick
up. I know they say like certain people can't pick up on certain notes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I feel like I don't have like as great of a palate as like maybe like more well-known judges are. Like I think I can appreciate beer very well and all that good stuff.
I feel like I have a decent palate, but I still like I see people write about beer and they're like, I'm getting like white peppercorn, and I'm like,
I'm like it's peppery.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah, it's a Belgian.
Yeah.
No, that's cool. And then, so if it's the business of craft beer, was it more geared towards like marketing then, or was it everything?
Kind of. Yeah, it was a little bit, it kind of taught everything from like running a bit like a brewery, right? So there was marketing components, there was like people within the program who were actually starting a brewery. So the founder and owner of Ike and Oak Brewing was actually part of my program, which is cool because, someone in there was like very seriously like, I'm doing this program to start a brewery.
Are they in Springfield?
They are in, it's right near Seven Bridges, which is suburbs. Okay. I'm like blanking on the exact suburb, but not Springfield.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There was Obed and Isaac. That's the one in Springfield. So
okay.
Different eyes.
Yes.
So that's cool. And then I saw that you have listed that you're a Cicerone also.
Yes, level 1. So that was also kind of part of
like the serving, or
yeah, it's like I like to give that clarifier. Like I would like to maybe do more in the program, but I've just done the first one to basically be like, I'm sure I can pass this first level. It's all online. Yeah. But yes.
Yeah, and then so you started the Beer Goggles blog. Mm-hmm. You met a lot of people doing that, you were saying, and then I guess how does that expand to? I'm not gonna use the term influencer, but how does that like expand to where you are now?
Yeah. So it mostly I'm just really grateful for it. Like, I think it's one of those things where it's like, it obviously started kind of like as a hobby, and it was always something where I was like working, and like friends and family, and I feel like everyone around me was like, oh, do you want to like work in beer full time? And I feel like I was never really sure, because I feel like you hear kind of mixed things about it. Like, I had, I have a marketing background, and I had been, in the workforce for like a decade, and kind of worked my way up in different capacities in corporate and tech. And I didn't really see a path in beer outside of just what I had been doing, across the industry. But then I was laid off last November and wasn't entirely sure what my next move was, because it wasn't planned for. And I was like especially grateful that I had like side gigs and passions and things that I did outside of my day job, because it, effectively it's been almost an entire year. And I've started a business, and I have like repeat clients, which is like genuinely shocking to say, because I just didn't necessarily like see where this would go. And it's still certainly, new, and I'm learning a lot, and I've never had my own business. But it is really exciting, and it's like I love setting my own schedule, because I am never someone who really thrived in like a 9 to 5 or like the typical work week. Like, I just get the work done when it makes sense, which is really nice.
Yeah. And so I know I've heard you say in other podcasts that you wiped all the Beer Goggles blog stuff.
Yeah.
But were you like writing about, because I know with Porch Drinking, which we'll get into, but with Porch Drinking, you were kind of focusing on like new breweries that started up. But Beer Goggles blog, was it more events that you were writing about going to, or like what was that?
Yeah. So it was like Mike Zoller came up to me at an event at Park and Field, and he was like, do you want to write for Porch Drinking? And I like deleted my blog the next day. Like, it was very impulsive. So I kind of wish I had saved more, just like out of curiosity, what it was mostly about. I will say that it was more chaotic. Like, it was very much just like whatever it was that I wanted to write about. It was a little bit about home brews, a little bit about breweries, but it certainly wasn't as focused as the work I tended to write about for Porch Drinking. And I think now, I've like developed my own website, and there's a component of that that's still writing, and it's more around like more timely of like what, I'm doing in the moment, whether that is like a beer event or, a brewery or cidery that I'm visiting and whatnot.
And were you seeing a lot of feedback from either your blog or Porch Drinking, like, either face-to-face or online or anything like that with people? I
think what was really exciting for me, I feel like a few that really stuck out is like I enjoyed covering new brewery openings, because it was me getting to meet, new brewers and new business owners in the neighborhood, and then really, helping to support them as they were launching their business. And so I've seen like articles I've done for Porch Drinking, like on people's websites, to be like, oh, this is like included in their like press roundup, which is just kind of cool to see. Cool. And I feel like it's led to just like people I've stayed in contact with for like being able to work together for future things, which is really awesome.
That is awesome. And then, so that kind of, so trying to think of like the steps of like everything that you've done, because I feel like you are constantly busy.
Yes.
But the writing and everything sort of like opens your network, and that allows you to start doing the events. And did you do the events prior? Because I know you were doing like the hops and pie or whatever, and that was before you started the beer adjacent thing. Correct?
It is, yeah. It's funny because I feel like because that was my first event, I technically, when I like say my start date for Beer Adjacent, I say that it was Pints and Pies, just because I'm like, well, that was like a legitimate thing, right?
I said hops and pies. I apologize.
I was like, if you want to do, we can do an event. So yeah, that was the first event I ever did with a friend of mine who was baked the pies, which is awesome. But yeah, I think it definitely helped. I would say where I started from an event standpoint was actually through like yoga, which was interesting. So during like peak pandemic lockdown, I was like beyond stressed for breweries during that time frame, which I know, many people were for small businesses in general. And so I started doing virtual beer yoga classes on Instagram, which is like slightly embarrassing, like because it was like going live, teaching yoga, like supporting this brewery. But it was really fun. And it was something where like, it was genuinely in the point where people couldn't leave their homes. And so there were people from literally like all over tuning in to take the class. And then I would basically just provide a link that would go back and like donate towards like the brewery or their fund for their bartenders or people that worked at the breweries. Yeah.
Can you recall some of the specific breweries, and were you like going live on their accounts or your
I
account?
was going live on my own. So I know I did Dovetail, Pilot Project. I lived right next to Pilot Project at the time, so I know I did one for them. I believe I did one for Village Tap too, because I used to bartend with them. Nice. And so I guess it was a combination, brewery, bars. But I did quite a few. It was like weekly, every single week. I don't think many exceptions to that. So
that's very cool. And the Pints and Pies, that's at Guild Row?
It was at Guild Row, yes.
And so, I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what's your role with Guild Row, or how did you get connected with them?
So I actually, I used to be, I love giving this example because it's like one of the more embarrassing facts about myself, but I used to be a Soho House member. And during the pandemic, it just like didn't make sense anymore because they were charging members and like you literally couldn't use the club. So I was like, I don't need to be here anymore. And so Guild Row had recently opened up and I had literally stumbled upon it because I was, I think, probably going to Metropolitan. They're right near one another. And so I, asked to take a tour, and they, it was super early on, they were trying to get new members, and they had basically reached out to me because during the tour I had mentioned my involvement just with the beer community, and they basically wanted people to help start and launch their beer program. So that was my intro. And then I've basically just been like a really heavily involved member of the club, and I do different events with them.
Yeah, when you say club, like I'm not super familiar with them.
Yeah, so they're a members club, and it's primarily a co-working space. But then they also do just like community-driven events, some of which are open to the public. Whenever I host, I try to just keep it open. And then, but yeah, mostly co-working space.
That's cool. And then, so I mean, people are just working; they can just go get a beer from the bar, kind of thing.
Yeah. So there's a bar on site, and then there's also kind of rotating like pop-up kitchens and different things that they have from a food standpoint as well.
That's cool. And so were you like the one reaching out to breweries to get beer there, or were you just telling them this and this would be good?
It was a bit of a combination, which was kind of fun because I had never really had that role before. I just really liked beer, and I wrote about it at that time. And so I basically helped like land on a menu, and then I helped the club get connected with distributors and reps to then like there's only 3 taps at the bar, but we like put the first 3 beers on tap. And then since then, for a little while, I was like updating the menu for the beer program. And so the event I did with them recently, I like curated the beer list and then brought in a chef to kind of partner with that as well.
Yeah, and the food and everything like that looked good. I remember
it was very good.
Yeah, the soy sauce. What was it? What was the egg again?
Oh yeah, it was a rooibos tea deviled egg.
Sorry. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, I had reached out to her because I had a tea hard-boiled egg in China before, and I had never seen it in the U.S. So I was like, what is that? I just wanted to make sure
so
that's
good.
What it was. So that's cool. So you're still going to be, I mean, do you have future events planned at Guild Row, or is that kind of something you're just leaving open right now?
I'm leaving it kind of intentionally open right now because I have a trip coming up in October, and so I'll be gone, so I can't host any, like, at least in-person events. And then the holidays are tricky. I do hope to have something either November or December, but then I'm already almost kind of starting to think ahead to next year, so I can, like, ideally plan a schedule where there's more consistent events going on, like at different venues, different style of events, and things of that nature. And
on top of the Guild Row events, you're also helping with the sauce market?
Yes. Yes. So my role is Sauce. I'm the brand manager. So primarily I've supported from like a social influencer marketing standpoint, and then kind of other things here and there as well. And so that's been really exciting because Sauce effectively works with all these local small businesses like artists, makers. A lot of that's involved in the food and drink space as well. And then our next market is actually coming up at Half Acre. So I feel like there's been a lot of crossover in the work that I do. And I actually was like introduced to the brand and the event like the same weekend that I had just lost my job. So the timing was really kind of funny. I met with the owner, and I just, I was kind of just telling everyone at that time because I was like told that's what you're supposed to do. And she was just like, hey, like I might need help with sauce. Like, let's stay in contact. And we did. And then as in March of this year, I started working with the brand, which has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Right place, right time.
Yes.
That's really cool. And then to go I guess I feel like we're jumping all over the place, but
Sure.
that you also through beer you reached out to a cidery, and so I wanted to hear, you were last time you did a podcast on the Drunken Uncultured podcast, you mentioned that you were going to possibly be doing this, and she said, like it's on, and then how was it?
Amazing.
And what's the name of it? Sorry, before you.
So Romilly Cidre is the name of the brand. And what was so funny, it continues to crack me up because I am on at least some press list that I feel like I'm accidentally on. And so I'll occasionally get invited to things that feel slightly outside of like what makes sense for me to go to, right? And so I was invited to Cider Summit, and I just historically really wasn't a huge cider fan, didn't know a lot about it, but got invited, had a +1, and so we went to this event. It was at Navy Pier, and this was last February, and there was this like winding line in the venue, and we're kind of like, do we wait in it? Like what, like we're not even big cider people, like, and so we had kind of sampled everything else, and we're like, you know what, screw it, like let's stand in this line, and we did. And the reason the line was there is it was this famous cidery from Normandy, France. The producer was in town from Normandy, and it like literally changed my mind about cider. It was so unbelievably good, and then just had a chance to talk to people from the company. They were just really like awesome people, and I at this point had many cider samples, and was just feeling very excited about everything. And I basically was like, I'm gonna be in Scotland for a friend's wedding, obviously not the same place, but I was like, do you guys do tours? Like, is that something, whatever? And they kind of blew it up to be like, oh my gosh, like you could probably stay on the family farm, you could like do all these things. And so I was like, screw it, I'm gonna make this work. And then I went to Scotland for a friend's wedding. My friend and I went to Paris, and I had been like WhatsApp messaging the producer, the cider producer, and rented a car from Paris and drove to Normandy and visited the cidery.
How far of a drive is that?
So it was supposed to be 2 hours each way.
And is it like, this might be sounding dumb,
but
is it like on the same side of the road, or?
Yes, no, it is, which is good because Scotland is not the same side. So thankfully, France was, but it took 5 hours for me to get there. And I think about 2-ish hours to get back to Paris, which I returned to at like 2-3 in the morning that night. So it was a day. And it was like just so many different like things that were just like on my end, like poor planning, just like.
So you didn't end up staying?
I didn't, which I should. I hadn't planned to because like in my mind it was like I had mapped out. It was like, great, I'll get there in the early afternoon. I'll hang out for a little bit. I'll explore a little bit, and I'll try to get back to Paris. I think my plan was like 9 or 10 or something. And then the day just like totally took a turn. Like traffic could not have been worse. There were all these accidents. I drove to the wrong cidery that had the same name first, and which was the more embarrassing part of that trip. So I had to message my contact there and was like, hey, I'll be there in an hour. I am at another cidery with the exact same name. So that was great. And then I get there and he's like, yeah, I've been meaning to say something to them, but it's not the French way or something. So it was just like an excursion.
But they spoke English.
Yeah. I mean, that type, like similar to visiting any other country, I feel like everyone is like very, it's not too much of a barrier. But yeah, it was an incredible experience despite the journey and getting there and the excursion. But it was just really cool because it was a like family farm that had been part of the family for a really long time. And it started as really like, a traditional farm, and then kind of like spun off where they started to sell cider and then kind of other like jam and different things. But it was just like a private tour of the entire operation, from like where they pick the apples and where they produce the cider and bottle it, and it was unbelievable. Just like such a cool experience. And
so as a novice cider drinker, I've had a lot, but I wouldn't say like understand it, but I prefer, so like my favorite beers are saisons and stuff like that. So I like the funkier, more Brett Ford ciders. Okay. What are Normandy ciders like? I mean, are they like, I know some are overly sweet, some are dry, some are, they could be anything. Yeah.
What's nice is they offered a range of them. So my favorite was like the super dry or like the brut cider, but they also did have like sweet variations, and they also did like liqueurs, and they also had, so they had just like such a range of options. And probably my favorite of all the things was this, I'm not going to say like the correct name, but it's basically a jam that they make out of different fruits. And it was like I would put that jam on anything. It was the best thing. Like I wanted to check my bag on the way home because it was like, it felt wasteful. Like he sent me home with a box of like all this cider, all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm in Paris for 2 more days. Like this is going to go to waste. But it was like my friend and I like enjoyed some of the cider and jam, but very, very good.
That is really cool. Yeah. My wife and I have been to Paris, and
nice.
We really enjoyed it. It was a good time. We didn't get down to like Normandy or anything like that.
It's far.
I do have to ask, so you are a yoga instructor.
Yeah.
And I said you're certified. You took the 200-hour course.
Yeah.
And so I was talking to my coworker about doing this, and she goes to Zen. When I was like, oh, she's an instructor at Zen.
Yeah.
She said to ask you how you do Zen burn and not die.
So I teach Zen burn. So, but that is a valid question because I feel like especially when the summer hits, like it's already a heated class. So for people that don't know what burn is, hot yoga with weights. And it is like a sauna. Like it is such a brutal workout. It is so challenging. Like, and I feel like it helps. Like I say it to people in my class. I'm like, this is a hard class. Like it doesn't really get easier. Like obviously people get stronger and you get like accustomed to it in a certain capacity, but like I've taught and taken this format for 10 years and it is still like an absolutely brutal workout. So it is like a valid question, but I feel like with that, I tell people like we offer bar classes. They're a lot less. I'm like, they're lower impact. And then we have just so many different formats. It's like just an awesome to do.
She was like, they shouldn't call it Zen burn. It's such an oxymoron or something.
Yeah. It's so hard.
That's cool though. So you're like staying busy and you're using the yoga in the beverage industry and then also doing it on the side at an actual studio. Yeah. If anyone wants to follow you and stuff, as far as just like the beer adjacent stuff goes. Yeah. You have your tasting notes, which is your email. And just you want to talk a little bit about what that's like?
Yeah. So tasting notes, I'm trying not to harp too much on like me being laid off because I feel like it keeps a lot of things come back to that. But I actually started Tasting Notes as a weekly newsletter, and it was kind of like early on just something like almost like a project for me to do each week. And so I feel like that carried a lot of weight of just like, great, every Friday I'm gonna like compile like upcoming like trends going on and events and, different things. And then I very quickly realized as I did start to get busier, which is not challenging for me to do, I was like, all right, let's like make this more realistic and I'll do this on a monthly basis, which I also have not been perfect about, but the goal is kind of a monthly newsletter that effectively does a combination of things. So I try to have like one kind of feature story highlighted within Tasting Notes, which will be just like, it'll basically go back to like a longer form blog. And then I'll have like best sips, best bites, just like things I've drank and ate in the past month and kind of highlight those things, local brands, businesses, or if I've traveled, I'll include that. And then I'll tend to include like upcoming events as well. So kind of a roundup of sorts, but I try to keep it like hyper local and very current. And then I'm continuing to think about how to evolve that because I feel like it's so quickly, like there's so many newsletters out there. I think there's some really incredible ones. And like I am still trying to iterate on that to ensure that it's like valuable. I think it's helpful for brands that I highlight when it's like, oh, like one of the best beers I tried this month, like people are always appreciative of that. But I think there's like, different ways to spin it too.
And I think that, not that I have experience with an email list, but I think that it could be beneficial for you to also use that for clients when you're reaching out to clients, like that you have it. Like you have X amount of emails that you send this weekly newsletter to. Yeah. It's like that kind of thing. Definitely. Can really help. And then for beer adjacent, you mentioned that you have like repeat clients and stuff like that. What kind of stuff are you doing now versus like what are you envisioning it to be later on?
So right now, and kind of since starting with client work, it's really been focused around like marketing consulting work. So I have a very broad range of marketing background. I've definitely worked across social media and influencer marketing. And then I've actually done some client work focused around PR, which is kind of funny because I never technically worked in that space, but it's like I'm so familiar with the industry and have a lot of different contacts that has actually evolved fairly easily, at least getting started in that space. What I really ultimately would love to not necessarily shift. I think there's like components of it that exist today, but I see it more as like a marketing agency. And so the goal would really be like, if I'm able to build this business and this brand, would be to hire on people that can kind of fill gaps that I have. So like I, can take photos with my phone and like make a TikTok or like do, like I can use Canva, which it's like, there's different things like paying attention to trends and whatnot, but it's like, I would love to hire on like a photographer, a videographer, a graphic designer, and people that like are very specialized in those areas, because I feel like those are the things that breweries need most, or clients. And that's where I'm not like super, strong at necessarily. I'm more on the strategy side of marketing.
Yeah. And it sounds like, there's only a handful of breweries I can even think of that have like a large marketing team behind them.
Very few. Yes.
So, but speaking of one of those, we are drinking Super Zero by Revolution. I'll let you, if you want to talk about it.
Yeah. So one of the other things I do right now, I'm a brand ambassador with Revolution, which I recently started doing. So we've been sampling this a lot. So it's their new hop water that I think literally was released like today-ish, like very, very recent. And so I like it. It's really, really hoppy and really, really flavorful. I feel like in the realm of hop waters. But it's nice because I feel like it's just a smart move for Revolution and breweries in general to have like something that's their own, not only from a distribution standpoint, but to have like at their tap room that's not just like an overlooked like NA list that's like an afterthought that it sometimes can be. It's getting better, but
I feel the NA market is getting better. I feel like I'm very hesitant towards it. I feel like the overfruited sours of that market tend to come off better to me than like the ales or the lagers or the IPAs, anything like that. But I love hop waters. I do like this one. It is really like citrusy, almost like pithy. Like even when you smell it, it's like I get like green, like fresh.
Yes. Yeah. It's very, I feel like from what I've heard is like they really were going for like encompassing the hop flavor, and like people that are very big like IPA fans would ultimately enjoy this over maybe someone who isn't, a fan of hops.
Yeah. And so the brand, what'd you call it again? Sorry,
brand ambassador. Yes.
I saw that you did like a fire game. Like what kind of events have you been doing with them?
So it's kind of funny because I actually applied to a role with Revolution a few months back on the brand side of things. And Doug, the CMO, actually reached out and he's like, "Thanks for applying, like really cool background," which I was like just freaking out that he emailed me, honestly. I was like, wow.
He's like, local celebrity.
Yes. And it was just cool. So he's like reached out and he's like, "Hey, if you're interested, we're going to have opportunities with the sales and marketing team for more like, event driven type things and brand ambassador stuff." And again, just being kind of like where I'm at with all the things, I was like, sure, like, like I'll see if I can squeeze that in, which has been challenging because Revolution, of course, is, they have so many events and they have such a large team of people that are helping to support this effort. But it's still early, but it's been so fun. Like I worked Bike the Drive this past weekend, which was cool because when I worked at Lyft, my previous company, I ran marketing for Divvy. So I like love cycling and biking. And those were the type of events I used to work for them. So it was kind of this cool like full circle moment where it's like, it looks a lot different now. Things are still very in flux. But it was really fun, like still being able to be like, I'm here with like this really cool brand that's like really well respected and really integrated like within the community, which is cool.
Yeah. I wanted to ask more specifically about that event. So the people are riding the bikes. I think you said it was like 30 miles. You mentioned earlier. They get off and you're just kind of like handing out free hop waters, correct?
Yes, that's what we were doing. So there basically was a beer garden. So like when people finished, they could come in and get tickets for like purchasing beers. And then Revolution also had a presence there where we basically like had this like booth set up and we had free hop water and like swag and stuff for people to grab.
And what's the like, I guess, I was going to ask this in general in terms of like doing an event that's maybe not as beer focused. Yeah. Like maybe it's like the secondary part of it. Mm-hmm. Do you find that there's more of like a education experience that you go through with that? Or do you prefer to do events where maybe like the pints and pies where it's kind of some people are there for the pies, some people are there for the beers? Or do you like, I guess like what's the difference or how do you feel those develop, I guess?
I think I feel like it's kind of the like, I do really appreciate the education side of things. Like, I know that is not for everyone, but I think there's a benefit when it's not just like a hyper beer focused either like audience or event itself. I just think that almost like, I think in my mind, like I've always been really interested in like casting a wider net and reaching a new audience, like because I think even like as I've become more immersed in like the world of beer, I'm like, there are beers that non-beer drinkers would like. And whether that means quite literally like people don't drink, great, like there's options for that now too. But I think even friends of mine who are like wine drinkers or like vodka soda drinkers, like there are beers out there that I believe like for everyone, and like maybe not everyone's gonna like go for that, but I think events that also have that education component, there's like that added layer that people also kind of walk away feeling like I think people are drawn to kind of stuff in the wine space, like wine tastings, because they feel like they walked away and they learned something and they can then kind of have this like, ooh, I'm like whatever.
Throw
whereas
some
like
words around.
Yeah, and like beer, I think there's like, understandably, right, because there's like the beer snobs in the industry and people that almost like try to like keep people out of it, but it's like that's never been my like approach.
So that's cool. I enjoy, like you were saying about people who like wine. Like my mother-in-law, for example, she likes like beer.
Okay, sure.
I think like Coors Light, that kind of thing.
Yep.
But that's got to be a hot day.
Yeah.
But I turned her on to, we were at Green Bench in St. Pete, Florida, which is my hometown.
Okay.
And they had a sour that was aged in wine barrels. And she
nice.
likes wine, like white wines. And so I like just like those tannic notes to that. Like I love trying, if somebody tells me they don't like beer, I almost like find it as a challenge. Like
Same.
just
Yes.
find something that they can like. And then Revolution, you also did the fire game, which I'm a soccer fan, so I'm just curious about. Is that just like a tailgating kind of thing?
It was, and that was probably one of the more fun events I worked with them as well. So we basically just popped up like within the tailgate, and so there we literally just had like a cooler of free beer and like t-shirts, and because it's like Revolution's a sponsor of Chicago Fire and like Hazy Pitch and all that. So that one was just like really just a great time. Like I was effectively just hanging out at a tailgate, and then we like went to the game after, and like that was a paid shift. So I feel like it's a pretty cool, it's a cool gig.
Getting to watch a game afterwards. That is really cool. Is there anything else that I do have like a couple questions at the very end, but is there anything else that you like wish I would have asked you, or anything that you got coming up that you want to plug? And where can people find you, that kind of thing? No, I think unfortunately there's not necessarily like specific things coming up in terms of like, I guess, the next event or things of that nature, but I think definitely like Beer Jason on Instagram. That's where I would say I still do the majority of all the things. And then tasting notes, like beerjason.com. It'll just be like that frustrating pop-up for people to subscribe. I wanted to say, your website is pretty cool. As someone who doesn't really make websites or anything, but I thought it looked pretty good. So.
I appreciate that. I feel like I'm such a perfectionist that I'm like, I need to redo my website. So it's wonderful hearing that.
What did you do it? Like whatever.
I used Squarespace as like which is pretty easy, I will say. Okay. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, no, I liked the way it was like laid out, and you had the about me and stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have some just like rapid fire questions.
Sure.
So favorite beverage, and this doesn't have to be alcoholic, doesn't have to be beer, doesn't have to be anything. Just favorite beverage.
Probably like cold brew coffee.
A song that everyone should listen to.
Candle Flame by Jungle.
Jungle. Okay, I am going to be making like a playlist of like everyone who tells me the answer for that, and just like
I love that.
Song on there. Favorite concert you've ever been to?
Remy Wolf at Lincoln Hall a few years ago, like before she was slightly bigger.
Favorite place you've had a drink?
Probably Romilly Cidre at Normandy, because it was so cool.
Yeah, I mean you're in France. What else can you ask? Right, and then last one, what's your guilty pleasure for music?
Shoot, probably like Third Eye Blind. I still listen to them all the time.
I mean, let's not hate on Third Eye Blind.
No, I certainly don't.
There's definitely a time and place for that, like 90s alternative.
Yeah.
I love that stuff. Well, I know you're very busy, and I wanted to say thank you for making time and
Thank
coming out
you.
here and being my first guinea pig for recording.
Absolutely.
And coming all the way to the northwest side.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll give you any last chance to say anything you want.
No, thank you for having me.
All right, very good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for listening, and until next time, drink some new beer and listen to some new music. Cheers.